What's up, everybody? Mark with the Steel City Roundtable. Thanks for joining us again. Kelly and Natalie could not join us this week, so we wish them luck and hopefully see them soon. But I have an amazing guest today. This gentleman I just actually started talking to about 2 weeks ago. He's a podcaster, a former combat veteran, an addict in recovery, a public speaker, a podcaster, an ultramarathon runner. The guy's pretty awesome. So I want to introduce you guys to Shawn Livingston of the I Am Redemption podcast.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming, man. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
So I gave a little bit of an intro, but why don't you get a little bit more about who you are so people know what you're about?
I'm originally from this area. I live down in Austin, Texas now. I got stationed down there in '07. I tell a lot of people sports kind of kept me in line growing up and everything, and then I started dabbling in drugs a little bit, early on after high school. But then 9/11 happened, and so I was off to the military. And I remember when I left, I had never really seen like hard drugs in my area in Youngstown. I know they were there, but they just weren't in my circle. And then when I came back, the area was leveled by OxyContin. So that's kind of where my story all started. So got hooked on oxys, bounced around for years trying to, run from the problem and all that. Little did I know, everywhere I went, I was still there. So then I come to realize I'm the problem, but eventually it led me to getting back in the military, got back in the Army, and then that's kind of where things went really bad. Went through a lot of different traumas there. Lost some people very close to me, and that's where heroin started becoming more of a thing for me. And so just through addiction and everything, ended up in Austin, Texas, got involved in the running community, and I didn't realize how much I needed that support of that, the camaraderie of a community like that. I didn't realize how much I missed it from the military, and so just got involved with that, and then running was a huge part and a huge catalyst to my story, and put me where I was at today. And the documentary 100 Miles to Redemption got made, and so I just been traveling around speaking with that and podcasting, and really just, I was blessed with the opportunity for my story to get out there. So really being able to platform some other people and try to help get their stories out. I don't know. I'm finally doing something in life where it's like, all right, I'm meant to do this in some form or fashion. I'm meant to be where I'm at.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that's normal for addicts. Like we addicts and alcoholics, we sit there and struggle for so long because we're doing what we think we're supposed to be doing, right? Like we take a job because it makes good money, or we hang out with these people because it makes us feel good. But then somewhere along the line, you have that moment where, there's a change that needs to be made.
Yeah.
So you said that you realized that this is something you're meant to do. How did that, explain how that feels for you, like going from your past to where you're just like completely the other side of the coin?
So I can tell you the exact moment. For those, I'm trying to make sense of this for people that are listening. But this documentary gets made about my story, right? And so up to this point in the Austin running community, I started kind of being known a little bit because I started doing ultra marathons. And so I'm around a lot of road runners. They know me as this crazy trail runner that's doing ultra marathons and all that. And so this documentary gets made, and my story was out there a little bit, but not like on a large scale. And so one of the first things they ended up filming was the trailer for the film. And so they did a small event because they wanted to get some excitement behind the project. And so they invited 200 of the Austin running community to this place, and then they were going to unveil the trailer. And so this trailer goes on, the lights go out, the trailer goes on, and within 3 minutes now 200 people know all my deepest, darkest stuff. 4-time felon, kicked out of the military, heroin addict, homeless, family won't talk to him, you name it. Now they know it all. And I remember when the lights went back on, the only way I can describe it is it felt like my mom had pushed me out of the house on the way to school naked. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the whole world could see me now, and I was so scared. I didn't know what all these people were going to be thinking of me. And so after that, every person in that room, 200 people, converge on me, and everybody starts coming off like, oh, my brother, sister, cousin, uncle, sexual trauma, mental health, addiction, all these things, and it just literally opened the floodgates for people. And that's when it kind of dawned on me. It was like, wait a minute, I didn't understand a world existed where we could take all this pain and all this bad stuff that we have been through and never use it for good, ever use it to help people. And so then, it's funny now that the things I was most ashamed of in this world are now the things I'm most proud of. The most proud of stand in front of hundreds of people and talk about. And so when I'm up on stage or when I'm talking with people or when I'm doing the podcast, I've done a lot of one-on-one coaching, stuff like that in the recovery community. But when I'm standing on a stage and I'm able to share my experience or my message or anything like that, and I get to certain parts and I know, like people cry, people laugh, and being on stage and doing that, it like started dawning on me where it's like, all right, wait a minute. I've seen a lot of people speak. Not a lot of people have ever been able to draw emotion out of me. And so when I started seeing that happen with people, I knew that, the message was doing something. The amount of people that I would have write me or come up to me afterwards, it let me know it was doing something. And so that's why it let me know it's like, all right, not everybody's able to do this. And it's the first time in my life where I have that inner peace and feeling where it's like, all right, I'm able to really help people. I'm able to take all this shit and turn it into something good. And to me, the most selfish thing I could have ever done when I got sober was to just go on and live my life.
Isn't it amazing that, you do it now because you can and not because you have to? Yes. Like, for me, when I got started, it was, my friend Kenny, who passed away, and, Kelly, who everybody knows. It was one of those things where I was like, I have this vision of something I want to do. It's kind of off the wall. Like, I don't know how it's going to go.
Right.
And like, so what was your breaking moment when you actually started the podcast, when you realized that this is something that's going to affect people?
So the podcast wasn't ever anything I had even thought of. I had sat down. I do a lot of speaking. So I was speaking at a treatment center actually, and the sister of one of the clients there had come up to me afterwards, and she was crying, and she was like, "I don't even know what you do, but whatever it is, I just want to help you." And so I have people say that to me quite a bit, and so I didn't think anything of it. And so eventually we would end up getting coffee, and she said, I have some people I'd like to introduce you to. And so I ended up taking a meeting and sat down with these guys who ended up being some pretty big businessmen in San Antonio, and it just so happens the one's a vet and he's 20 years sober. And so he's a philanthropist. He loved my message and what I was doing. And so that I remember they had asked me a question, and they were like, how do you feel about social media? And I was like, I'll be honest, I hate it. I like looking at it for my sports and stuff like that, but I will never be the guy that's holding my phone up and going live or doing that. That's just not me. And I thought at that moment that was going to make them like not want to work with me, because that's the name of the game is how many followers do you have and stuff like that. It turns out that was the exact thing that made them want to work out with me, because they said if you walked in here and you were enthusiastic about social media, or you loved it, or you were hungry for that, that shows that you're trying to get famous, or you want that.
I hate social media.
Yeah.
I absolutely hate it. I'm like you. The only reason why I do it is because I'm trying to get this out there.
Right.
Like if it wasn't for social media, I think this would be so much more fun some days,
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just so miserable, to sit there and go, I got to post today, I got to get it out there. And as well as anybody, it's all about algorithms and posting at the right time and using the right templates and doing all that stuff. So, you've got kind of a crazy story. You mentioned it before, and let's go back to it. 100 Miles to Redemption, the documentary.
Yeah.
I didn't get to watch the whole thing. I'm going to be honest with you, but I watched about 20 minutes of that thing, and it's like...
Well, let me finish real quick. So the guy said, let me just go back to it.
Yeah.
So I finished the thought. So when I told him I didn't like social media, he was like, well, have you ever thought of doing a podcast? And I was like, oh, no, not really. He's like, well, if you do a podcast, that takes care of social media for you. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, then you just post the clips. And I was like, oh, okay, tell me more. And so then we sat down and did one episode eventually, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And so then that's where kind of like where my mindset was like, wow, I have a special opportunity here to be able to help showcase other people's stories. Because being in the recovery community, I mean, you can't throw a rock without hitting somebody that has a wild and crazy story. And so the idea for the podcast happened. I didn't want it to be just recovery. I just want people that have been through adversity. And so that kind of opens the door for a lot of other, whether it's athletes or law enforcement, just anybody from any world that's been through adversity, which we all have. And be able to bring them on, and then hopefully, as I've been able to get bigger and bigger guests on, those bigger guests are what help be able to bring light to the people who have an amazing story but may not be big on social media and stuff like that. And so it just kind of one hand washes the other with it.
Yeah, like I'm still learning all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like I've been doing this since March, so it's a learning curve. It's there's so many times where I just want to throw in a towel and be like, this is so hard. But then I talk to other people, like, you realize you're already successful. Like, you're doing it every week or every week and a half or whatever. You're putting content out. And I think that's the thing that gets lost in what you're doing and what I'm trying to do is that, we're so used to judging success as like pass fail. Like there's no gray areas, right? And success is a gray area.
Yeah.
It's what you make of it. If you're accomplishing your goals and you're successful, and I have to say, like, what you're doing is amazing. All the things that you've done. You got 17 things different going on at the same time, and yet, your message is always true. Like it's always heartfelt. You know what I mean? And I want to say thank you very much for what you're doing because, I would love to find some people in Pittsburgh that are like that. That want to do the same kind of thing. With the, like I was saying, the documentary, like I saw some of that and I'm like, this dude's seen some shit. Like he's gone through some shit. Let's talk about your military career for a little while. You said you were in the military, then you came out, then you went back in, you got kicked out of the military. Can you go into that a little bit and just kind of give like a short synopsis of that?
Yeah, so I did 6 years in the Air Force, was a crew chief on C-130s, was young, joined right after 9/11, got stationed over in Germany, and I thought I hated it. I just didn't have the life experience to understand how good I had it. And so I thought I was missing all these big bad things that were going on back home, and I was missing out on what my friends were doing. And so that would lead me to make the decision to get out when it was time. And I go back home, Oxycontin had hit. It was just, what did I do? I just knew immediately I'd made a drastic mistake. And then I started messing around in the drugs and stuff. But then I get, cleaned up enough to where I could get back into, you got time for a crazy story?
I got time, all the time in the world, man.
So I'm down in, I bounced around from different states, and we'll get back to the military thing, but bounced around in different states, had landed myself in Miami, Florida, and it was the first time where I had like burned everything down. I got no money, no options, no place to live. And so I call home and I tell my family I need help. I'm hooked on heroin. And so it was the one and only time they were going to pay for me to go to treatment. And so I ended up going to a detox in Tampa. I'm sitting in detox there. I talked to my mom on the phone, and she's like, hey, do your research, pick a place, and your grandmother and I are going to pull together the money, and we're going to send you to treatment. I'm kicking dope. I'm not doing any research. You know what I mean? I'm just being honest, and I'm young. So all I hear is a bunch of people in this place are going to this place in Louisiana. So I'm like, cool, I'll go there. They did the work for me. So I get shipped down to Louisiana. I show up to this treatment center. It's a beautiful land. It's got 2 big houses on it, men's and women's house. And I start noticing the first couple of days, every room I went into had a picture of this guy on the wall. And I have no idea who this guy is. I mean, it's almost like he's the president or something like that. And so after like day 3, finally I'm like, I asked one of the clients, I'm like, who's this guy on the wall? And they're like, oh, that's L. Ron Hubbard. And I was like, who? And they're like, oh, he's the founder of Scientology. I'd landed myself in Scientology rehab somehow. And so I was in rehab at Scientology for 4.5 months. Absolutely relapsed the very first night I got out. So it didn't work for me, but it was just a crazy journey, crazy place to have ended up.
I mean, what is that like? I mean, that's just like a cult.
Bro, it was to look back, there was actually some good stuff in there. If you actually applied it, it would work. But there was they had us doing 8 hours of sauna a day to sweat out the drugs in our system. They said there would be, you might spend 12 hours going and touching this wall, walking over and touching this wall, walking over and touching this wall. You might sit here and touch this table for 12 hours. Like, they had you do some of the most wild stuff ever.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that. I'm still a firm believer that, AA is a good way to start for an alcoholic. It's a good place it's a good foundation.
Much better.
So the documentary comes out, and what was it like watching yourself, telling your story on a big screen?
Bizarre. It's still bizarre. It's the most surreal thing that ever happened to me. Stuff like that. We don't get phone calls like that. Stuff like that doesn't happen for us. But, dude, it's one of the things that lets me know there's something bigger in this world looking out for me than me. 'Cause that's the only way stuff like that happens.
Yeah, that whole control thing that gets us in trouble. Mm-hmm. So you get booted from the military, and then you get into addiction, and then you go to rehab, you relapse, you go back into the military. What made you go back? Was it the lack of community, the lack of the word that's overused, brotherhood, and people use that a lot, but
it was my only option.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was either that or get a little, 9 to 5 or something like that. But I knew I couldn't stay in the area. I had nowhere else to go. So it's like, what am I just going to go set up a brand new place again? That takes a lot of money. And so it just made, I knew I needed that structure back into my life. At the end of the day, it wasn't enough to keep me what I needed to be. But got back into the Army, and as soon as I got stationed at Fort Hood, we were immediately training to go to Iraq. And so I ended up getting about after I was there for a couple months, I ended up getting injured. We were doing a drill called 3 to 5 second rushes, and I had just come up one time and felt a little tweak in my back. Next thing I know, the next morning I can't even sit up or get up out of bed. I had herniated 2 discs in my back that was pinching my sciatic nerve. And so, unfortunately, at that time in the military, the education on opiates isn't what it is today. So they just started handing me huge bottles of painkillers and hitting me up with steroids. And so I had deployed, which was a horrible. Definitely shouldn't have done that because it just made it all worse.
So they made you feel great, by masking all your pain, but
Yeah.
then.
I'm not going to blame the military. A lot of it's my fault. You know what I mean? The education wasn't what it is today. I definitely didn't take them prescribed. I didn't leave them really any other choices. But so then I go, get deployed and everything like that. Thank God made it through deployment without losing my life or contributing to the loss of somebody else's. You know what I mean? That we served with, just because I was getting high over there the whole time. Getting stuff through the mail, just any different route I could still get stuff. I was still an addict while I was over there. And so people talk about PTSD and all that, and there's something for me at least when you're over there, you're able to make sense of things. You're in a war zone if something happens. And so when we came back was when all the bad stuff really happened. That's where the wheels came off for a lot of people. My squad leader, who, if I was going to show you or the audience like the definition of what an American soldier is, I would show you a picture of my squad leader. He was that. I looked up to him. Just everything you wanted to have someone you serve with. And so we go and, am I messing the mic up?
No, you're good.
So I'm a diehard Steelers fan. He's from Boston, so he's a Patriots fan. So we get back from deployment. We were sitting there talking. They were playing, so we were talking shit back and forth through text. Next morning, I show up to formation to find out that he had emptied a clip on his wife, and then took his own life. He was drunk, and found out she was cheating on him on deployment supposedly, and so he did this with both of his small children in the house. And so when I tell that story, I need people to understand how completely uncharacteristic this is for this man. Like, he is the definition of an American soldier. So the fact that he would do something like this, I still can't comprehend it. My best friend in the world, he had hung around me so much and watched me do so many drugs that he just thought it wasn't a big deal. He would end up getting stationed somewhere else, didn't know that he wasn't supposed to make opiates and Xanax, laid down for a nap, never woke up. And that's my absolute best friend in the world. And then another one of my very, very good friends, he went home on leave when we got back from deployment. Apparently he was drinking and popped some pills one night. The paramedics and police would find him passed out on his kitchen floor. Next to him, dead, was his mother from blunt force trauma to the head. And so this all happened right as we got back from deployment, all within like the matter of a month or two. And so I'm off. I have hazard duty pay. I'm losing all these people close to me. I'm running around shooting up anything I can get into my arm. And so it was off to the races there. And so that would lead me to getting kicked out. I got arrested immediately as soon as I got kicked out, caught a DUI and 2 felonies for possession of heroin. And so got a girlfriend in treatment. I did everything you shouldn't do. And so that's why within a year of getting out, I was on my way to prison.
I mean, PTSD, I always say PTSD isn't selective. It doesn't have a niche. It doesn't have a target. It's subjective.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own traumas. I have my traumas. You have your traumas. Your traumas, the stuff that you go through and that you've seen is probably more along the lines of what people think you're supposed to see. Mm-hmm. To have PTSD, right? They don't think that a breakup could cause PTSD, or getting kicked out of your apartment can cause PTSD, or your parents getting divorced could cause PTSD. For me, a lot of my stuff was childhood. Mm-hmm. And then you add the stuff that happened later in life. So, when did you find out that you had PTSD? Did you get diagnosed, or did you just say one day, I think I have PTSD?
No, they diagnosed me. When I got out, they diagnosed me PTSD, depression, anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, sleep disorder, nightmares. But that was the problem. So they diagnose me with these things, and then they slide you 15 bottles of pills. Anybody that's been to the VA knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so the pills are what got me in trouble in the first place. And so once I got sober, once I got healthy, once I got involved in the gym and the running community and stuff like that, it made me pretty resentful towards the military, towards the VA, that whole system, because I go back to those appointments and I think about those, and not one time did anybody ever ask me, are you exercising? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? Do you drink water? Like all the fundamental things of being a good, healthy human being, nobody ever asked me. It was just pills, pills, pills.
Wow. I mean, my diagnosis is depression, anxiety, PTSD, and I didn't get diagnosed until I went to treatment last year. And for me, that was like, now I know what's wrong with me.
I mean, they if you've been in law enforcement, they should just pretty much, I mean, across the board, give it to y'all. I don't even.
Yeah, I mean, first responders, I think that there's no way a first responder cannot have some extent of PTSD just because, the shit you see, like when I was working, I saw guys that, had a meat volcano for a head. They shot themselves through the jaw and their head's just squirting out all over the place. You walk in there, you're like taking information, calling homicide, and you just go about your business. You compartmentalize this shit. Like besides the opiates, once you were in addiction, like did you have any other like avenues to like healthy when you were in addiction? Because I know when I was in addiction, I would still go to the gym. Oh, no, but granted, I would go to the gym with a 40-ounce tumbler with 30 ounces of vodka and a pre-workout drink mixed in it. You know what I mean? Like, but I still thought I was being healthy because I was still doing something. Because I always found that exercise made this go away. Right. Made a lot of the stuff in there kind of equalize. So it was just pills and that was it.
In addiction?
Yeah.
Oh no, I was 24/7. I was a fiend. I was a drug addict. It was the grind 24/7. That was all that I thought about, all I did. And if I wasn't on that grind, I was just plotting on how to get more money. I was a bottom of the barrel addict for sure.
Yeah, see, it's really different. Addiction is addiction, but I think there's a very big difference between substance addiction and alcoholism, because I think a lot of times the alcoholic is, the lawyer, the doctor, the banker. It's not always the guy sitting down on 51 Sawmill Run Boulevard with a 40-ounce bottle in a brown paper bag.
Right. Different levels of it.
And there's different levels to everything. Like stereotypically, everybody thinks this is what an addict is. This is what an alcoholic is. What's it like to spend every day like fighting that demon? And, because I know I would wake up and be like, I'm not drinking today. But then 3 hours into my shift at work, I'm like, oh, if I get done by this time, I can hit the bar on my way home. I could pound a couple drinks and I can go home and I can drink as much as I want. And it would happen every day. Right. Like the last 3, 4, 5 months, every single day, it was like, I'm not going to drink. But then I would drink. Yeah. So like, what's it like to go through that mentally and physically to just be, I guess, ruled by that drug?
I mean, it's the most exhausting, defeating thing you could ever see. I think that could be one of the fundamental differences. There was never a morning where I woke up where I said, I'm not going to shoot dope today. As soon as my eyes opened, it was, how am I going to shoot dope today? Yeah. There was never. Until you hit complete rock bottom and you have a judge that stares you in the face and tells you he's going to charge you as a habitual criminal and he doesn't see any reason to sentence you to under 20 years. That was the moment where like all the tough guy shit for me went out the window. That's where I started thinking, I was like, okay, I've got to change my ways. But at the time when that happened to me, it was a foregone conclusion. I was going away. And so that's really what I needed, to be honest, because it was at that moment where I had talked to my lawyer, and I said, can I at least have a little bit of time to try to get sober before I go away? Hopefully so I can get on speaking terms with my family, hopefully so I don't got a kick when I go to county, like all these things. And he's like, yeah, we could do that. And so that was the first time I went to treatment to get sober and not to get out of trouble.
Yeah, see, there's a lot of similarities. Granted, we have different backgrounds, right? I tried to get clean in 2017. I went to treatment in 2017, and I was still with the police department at the time. And after 2 weeks, they sent me home saying I wasn't sick enough. The insurance, literally, I got done. I went to this place out in the middle of the state. It was like military type, rehab center, 17 hours a day, rehab talk, AA meetings all day. It was the works. Like you were told what to do every piece of every day. And I come back from lunch. We were out there playing basketball, and then I come back in. My therapist is like, "You got to go home." I'm like, "Bro, like I just adjusted to being here. I've been here for 2 weeks. Like I'm okay being here now." Because I don't know about you, but my anxiety was off the charts when I went to treatment. Like I literally couldn't function. You know, I couldn't even get through like 2 hours without having panic attacks. So like you get to rehab, right? What was it like checking into a rehab, being a type A personality, you know, being a military veteran, being someone who, you know, you're physically fit, of course, but just being we all think we're strong, right?
Yeah.
We all think we're strong, but you're a type A guy. It's clear as day. What was that transition like for you when you went to rehab to get clean, not just going to rehab to detox?
I would say I was a much more beaten down version of myself then. So I don't know if I was that type A, because I just didn't have the confidence. Like, you know what I mean? I was bottom of the barrel, depressed, thought it, just think I'm a piece of shit. Like, I'm a worthless drug addict, all that. So I acted like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was raised right, so I still was always courteous. You know what I mean? I was still kind, even though I was a bottom of the barrel drug addict. I never got down with stealing or any of that stuff. I wasn't out robbing people.
You were a blue collar addict.
Yeah. And so going into there, I think going into treatment, it was different each time, because usually I was going to try to get out of trouble, or, you know what I mean? I wasn't going for the right
It was
reasons.
an escape.
But I operate very, very, very well in structured environments like that. Like I'll thrive. So that, it's almost, like I didn't have a hard time in prison. Like the military prepared me for that. You're in close quarters with people from all different walks of life that you can't control what they do. There's some people that stay up late. There's this, that, and the other thing. So like I was, in a sense, comfortable, prepared for that type of stuff.
Yeah.
When I go into treatment, like I've been there 12 times. Let's do it. It's funny. My wife and I, we just started doing some couples therapy, just to be more healthy, to work on communication and all that. And so we'll sit down and we'll do these.
Don't say that too loudly, because my girlfriend's in there and she might want me to get some sensitivity training.
But we sit down and we have to do these exercises where you sit down and you sit knee to knee and look at each other. Well, she's not used to. She's over there giggling and she can't even keep a straight face. Well, this is second nature for me. This is what I do. This is treatment center stuff. So I'm like, I know exactly what we're doing here. You know what I mean? It's like, it's bad. I'm that comfortable doing those things.
It's crazy, because a guy I went to treatment with, he was a lot like you. Like I think he was on his 11th or 12th time, and he's an alcoholic. He's actually my roommate.
Okay.
What's up, Maddie? Love you. He was the same kind of guy. Like he had it figured out. You know, he was like, I do smart recovery at home. You know, I post meetings and this and that. And he relapsed. As soon as, like 7 months after, it was the longest he'd been sober, but 7 months after he got out, he relapsed again, and he went through a rough time, and he's clean and sober again now, thank God.
Because he's not doing smart recovery.
Well, he still does smart recovery, but he
kidding.
he works at a treatment center now.
Okay.
So he's got a daily reminder of what it's like to ride in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
You know, so the transition goes, I guess sounds like it was fairly easy, because you were already broken down to the point, like we all use the term rock bottom, right?
Yeah.
Like rock bottom is like, hey, everybody says it. And I keep talking about this t-shirt from this company called inspiringsobriety.com. It says, I didn't know rock bottom had a basement, because I hit rock bottom in 2017. 2023, I was buried underneath the house, you know? If you can narrow it down to one moment, like one specific incident that just changed everything for you, what would that be?
My mom stopped picking up the phone when I was in prison. It almost made me tear up right now. When she stopped picking up the phone for me was when I knew. I was like, all right. There's if you watch the documentary, there's a story in there. I come home off leave from Iraq, and I specifically came home in June because that's when my mother's birthday was. And so I'm over there getting all this hazardous duty pay, and so I have this grand idea. I'm going to go home on her birthday, and then I'm going to do something special for her on her birthday. I'm coming home from Iraq, everybody's proud of me, and I come home, and as soon as I get home, I think it's a great idea to go get dope. And so I go over to get dope. They're going to have a surprise party for my mom and my entire family that night, and I get popped on leave from Iraq. And so now if you don't go back, and we're in wartime.
Yeah.
So now you're a deserter. So now there's all these things. My unit's going to find out. My life is pretty much over from what I think. And so I get popped. And so my mom doesn't get a call until 4 a.m. They have no idea where I'm at. I ruin her entire birthday, embarrass her in front of our entire family and all her friends, because now they know something's wrong. And so the next day I ended up, long story short, I ended up bonding out, getting out. She was there to pick me up. And I got in the car and I just remembered, mascara running. She had been up crying all night, hadn't slept. And I get in and immediately my selfish ass starts going in with, well, mom, hit her with excuses. And I remember she just looked over at me with that mom look and she's like, just don't. And we drive for a little bit and I'm sitting there. All I can think about is I want a cigarette. I need a cigarette, need a cigarette, need a cigarette. She pulls into a McDonald's. And I look over and I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? And she looks over with tears in her eyes. She goes, I figured you were hungry. And my heart sank into my feet because I'm like, how could I have just done this to this woman? And her first thought through all this is, I figured you were hungry. Like, only a mother's love. And so all that, but when she stopped picking up the phone when I was in prison was when I knew, like, you are a fuck up and you have to change some things. If your mom won't even talk to you now, it's time to change.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I've never had good relationships with most of my family, so it's like I can't imagine what it's like for the person that you care about the most in the world to like turn their back on you. Yeah. So I can't even imagine what that's like. So going back to some of the stuff you said earlier, your podcast, it's I Am Redemption podcast. It's good shit. You guys should watch it. Where's that available on what networks?
It's all platforms. YouTube's the video, so we always try to channel people to YouTube, but it's on all the major streaming platforms.
What's your favorite part about podcasting?
My favorite part, definitely. I mean, so whenever I go speak, it's funny. It'll be something that I don't even. It'll be something obscure. You know what it's like. You go to a meeting and you say something obscure. It's like a throwaway comment you don't even think about.
And somebody goes.
But that's the one thing that comes up and people are like, oh man, that right there, like that hit. So when I get people that write me or message me about stuff that we've talked about on the podcast, or, people tell me it's helping them stay sober or made them not do this or whatever like that, that I would say is because that's why I do it. So to know that I'm set out on this mission and it's becoming successful and people are catching it and stuff like that. That is it. And then it's also just cool to be able to be in the position to sit down and, like, I just had Dakota Meyer, the first living Marine in over 40 years, doing the Medal of Honor. To be able to get to sit down and talk like that, or some of the UFC fighters I've had on, or any of the people I've had on, Olympians. I mean, there's so many people that I've had on. It's like, if it wasn't for podcasting, I would have never got to talk to these people. And then it's also amazing to be able to have some of my close friends and some of the people in the recovery community that have these amazing stories, but they don't give a shit about social media. They're not putting their face in a phone and talking about their stuff. But to be able to give them a platform to be able to come share their stuff on, and you know what I mean? And then them have that effect where people are now messaging them that it's affected them. I'd say those are all my favorite parts.
Yeah, I mean, I've reached out to so many people in the recovery community that I know, and nobody wants anything to do with this.
Really?
They just don't. They don't want to talk. AA is good enough for them. NA is good enough for them. Confined walls. Nobody talks. All your shit's safe.
Yeah.
I took a little bit different path. I did a podcast when I came back from rehab, and I was like, oh, let me talk about all my shit in front of people that have no clue about who I am. Mm-hmm. Being a military veteran, I know me being law enforcement, that was a big hang up for me to get clean. Because I didn't know how to do sober as a cop, as in like where I could go for meetings or who I could talk to, because there's that stigma that like you're the fixer, right? You fix problems, you don't have problems, right? I'm stronger than that. Like I can get through anything. What's it like? Did that ever break into you, being ex-military, that like I'm not supposed to have to deal with this fucking problem?
No, not really, because we're all. I mean, everybody's a partier, and there's definitely a party culture in the military. I know how many dudes I got high with and all that. So no, it's been surprising, dude, because there was a lot of people that I served with at the time that looked at me crazy for how bad my stuff was and being an addict and all that. And then I've talked to quite a few people recently that I served with who they weren't drinkers, they didn't do drugs, they didn't take pills or anything. And I talk to them now 10 years later, and they're having issues of their own. So to see that start happening, and then I've been blessed with the opportunity now doing the podcast that a lot of people know my story and know what I do, and so I've had people that I served with reach out that needed help, and I've been able to get them plugged in that needed help. So I don't think. I think it would be different for law enforcement because I've been blessed with the opportunity to sit down with some law enforcement where I'm from, and they were very open and honest in talking about we have officers in active addiction right now. We have officers that are in treatment. We have officers that are going home and drinking a bottle a night and think that because they're not hurting anybody that's okay. And they were very honest, and they said I don't know what it was, the fourth floor is where if an officer's having trouble, they go up to the fourth floor to talk to somebody. They said nobody goes up there because if you're seen going up there, then everybody knows your stuff. And so they isolate and just bury that stuff
I mean, you
down.
definitely get looked at differently. People look at you differently because, you don't have to tell them, FMLA is a great thing, right? You apply for FMLA leave, you go away, you come back. But somebody has to know what you're doing, right? Like my direct bosses knew what my problem was. And it's just like, that's one of the reasons why I left was everything had changed for me. Like, I identified myself as a police officer.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is like, did you identify yourself as like military was who you are, or military was just part of who you were?
Military was part of who I was. I don't, because I knew, maybe when I was younger, but I knew my time in the Army. I wish I could be. I now have a very profound understanding that I had to go through everything I did to be who I am today, and I wouldn't change that for anything. I wouldn't change a thing. But if I had to go back and change something, I wish I could be the man I am now back when I was in the Army.
100%.
You know what I mean?
100%. If I would have known half the things I know now, I always like to say, like, I was given a second chance, so now my second chance is I have to help others. Like, that's the only way I stay sober. That's the only way I'll ever stay sober. The minute I stop doing this, or the minute I stop, talking to people about shit and trying to help people that are struggling, is when I relapse.
Yeah.
A lot of people have that mentality, like, I'm recovered. What do you think about that?
I believe in it.
See, I believe that I'm going to be in recovery for the rest of my life.
Okay.
I don't believe I'll ever be recovered because I just know me.
Right.
And I know how my brain works. I know that it's only going to take something like that for me to go right back to it. I'll never be safe from alcohol.
Right.
Some
people. So here's a good example. The treatment center that I went to is a state funded place, and so shortly after that, the documentary gets made, all these things, and so I became very close with the director of the treatment center. He and I ended up becoming very good friends years later, and so he would often use me as a reference to a lot of the clients of like, this is what you could do here, and so I remember somebody had reached out to me. And everybody at the treatment center knew who I was. I was there routinely, but they had a new guy start, and he was the alumni coordinator. And so he had called and asked me. The director had given him my name and said, "This is who I want to represent us." And they were at the state capitol in Austin, was asking for somebody to come speak on behalf of like veterans, military, mental health, or veterans, addiction, mental health. So they were gonna have me come. And so he was like, I have a couple questions for you, but once we knock those out, we'll get you ready to go. And his first question was, he was like, are you currently suffering from mental health or, substance abuse issues or whatever, however he asked it. And I was like, no. And he goes, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, no, I'm not currently suffering from anything. And he goes, well, and then he went into the whole like, oh, your addiction's right around the corner. It's doing push-ups. You're never recovered. And I was like, I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to say what you want me to say right now that I'm currently suffering from, because if I did, that would leave anybody that hears this to believe that I'm just white knuckling it through life right now.
Yeah.
I can tell you I've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. When I wake up in the morning, I don't struggle with the decision of, am I going to get high today? I'm not saying it can't happen, but I don't struggle with that decision. So when I say I've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, I'm a recovered addict. I'm not saying you can't still relapse or anything like that, but as far as if I'm struggling through day-to-day life, I lead a very, very good, fulfilling life. I help a lot of people. So I do feel in a sense that I am, I'm recovered from the hopeless state of mind and body. I won't say I'm recovered from addiction.
Yeah, it's like the whole difference of dry drunk and being a happy drunk, right? Like what I preach when I talk, to my friends that are in addiction or fighting addiction is like, you can get sober, you can get clean, but are you happy? Like at the end of the day, you got to be happy. Like I'm living my best life at 50 years old.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I don't white knuckle life anymore. I don't sit there and have to think every day like, oh, if something bad happens today, am I going to drink? But like I'm one of those people, addictive personality. I know that the safest thing for me is to think that addiction's right around the corner again, because that way I run the other way.
Of course, yeah.
You know, and I'll tell you what, I'm not going to stand and fight addiction. I'll run every time.
Yeah.
I'll run. I don't want to fight that battle again.
Right.
You know, that 47 days was the longest 47 days of my life. When you went to your treatment center, did they do any kind of specialized therapies like neuro or EMDR or any of these like trauma-based therapies?
That wasn't really, that didn't get big until like more recently. I didn't even know what EMDR was back when I was going to treatment. But so I think within the past 7 years, it's become a lot more prevalent. I did so much stuff at the VA. I probably did some of it and didn't know that's what I was doing. But I've done all the different therapies and all that kind of.
Yeah, that shit saved my life.
Yeah.
It 100% saved my
Good.
life. It reprogrammed my entire brain so I could think logically again. Granted, I wasn't drinking a half gallon of booze every day, so I was able to think clearly. But, you know, I'm a firm believer that, you know, when we're in addiction, you know, we're living with the emotional mind. Logical thinking, logical common sense is out the window. What would you say to somebody who sees a friend or a family member or a loved one or a coworker that has a drastic character change, and you know, we smell our own. You know, you could walk down the street and you see certain mannerisms and you're like, well, that guy's probably an addict or that guy's probably a drunk. Because I think this is a two-way street. Like, friends need to police friends. You know, friends need to look out for their friends. You know, what would you say to somebody that if you saw them and you thought they were struggling with addiction, or you just saw this giant character change, like, what would you do as a friend? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that there is a place for friends to intervene.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of interventions.
Right.
You know, I don't want to be surrounded by 10 of my fucking closest friends telling me I'm a piece of shit.
Right.
I'd rather have somebody be like, you all right? Like, what's going on with you?
Right.
You know, so what would you tell the people like that are on the outside? I know it's a tough question because it's kind of open-ended, but
So, number one, it's the people that love you that tell you the things you need to hear, not the things you want to hear. And so it is on a, but my view on this has kind of changed a little bit over the years. And so I'm absolutely will be the one that'll have that tough conversation with a friend in a heartbeat. And I'm going to do it in a very direct way, because at the end of the day, we're talking about your life.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sugarcoat shit. Like, I'm going to come at you. More than likely, if you really are fucking up, you're not going to like it, and it's going to cause you to go the other way. And so it's like, all right, what's best now? And so all I know is it didn't matter what anybody said to me. I had to figure it out on my own. You know what I mean?
you're never ready till you're ready.
Right. And so that's the kind of the cause, you know what I mean? If you're my boy, if you're my really good friend, yeah, we'll have a conversation and I'm going to check up on you and stuff. But at the end of the day, bro, you're a grown man. If this is what you want to go do, have a ball. Like,
Because I think a lot of people, they sit there and they want to force somebody.
Yeah.
They want to force somebody to get clean and get sober. Like, it's either court mandated or, you know, your therapist telling you have to go. Your family's like, oh, we're going to cut you off if you don't go. And I don't think people really realize that are on the outside that, you know, we have to go through these things. We have to go to the point where we can't go any further before we can make that choice. Because for me, it was an epiphany. Like I told you, you know, I woke up crying on my floor. You know, I woke up crying and looked like a bomb went off in my apartment. And I was just like, I wanted to kill myself. And I still don't know how I didn't.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to that point where?
many times.
Yeah.
Yeah, many times.
That's a sign of strength, man. That's a sign of strength that you get to that moment and you don't do it. You know, so many people, unfortunately, you know, lose that fight.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm glad that you're like me in that like, it just, I get choked up about it because I just remember how things went down. And, you know, how did you work through that stuff when you got to that point where, you know, you're like, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is the way out.
Man, I hopefully this makes sense, but even as an addict, I was still a good person.
Yeah.
And I knew that. I knew how I was raised. You know, I remember walking into prison and looking around, and I'm like, I'm not like these people. You know what I mean? And I was, but I didn't think I was. But I can remember there was a moment when I was in county and I was getting ready to catch chain, they call it. So you're getting ready to go away to prison. And I remember being in the holding cell and waiting to catch chain, and a dude had walked in. And one thing I always thought about when I was young, I would see people with prison ink tattoos, and I would always be like, I was young and I didn't know. I'm like, I wonder when they get out, why don't they get that stuff touched up to make it look nice? I'd always wondered that my whole life. And so I'm in this holding cell, and this younger guy comes walking in, and he's like, man, I can't wait to go down. He's like, I'm going to have all penitentiary ink. And the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's why they don't get it changed. They want everybody to know where they've been. You know what I mean? They're proud. This is a badge and honor. Prison was not a badge of honor for me. The whole time I was like, I was not raised like this. Like, what the fuck am I doing? And so I think that's what I always held on to, is like, I know this isn't me. I know me is in there somewhere. I just got to be able to find it. And so I think that's maybe what kept me holding on. But I didn't have a girlfriend, or, you know what I mean? There was nothing like that to cling on to. It's like, I need to be around for my kid. I didn't have any of that. So other than that one thing, or God having a bigger plan for me than I have for myself, would be the only things that kept me here on this earth, I'd say.
Are you an NA guy? Did you go to NA?
I mean, I've been to NA meetings, but I'm not an NA guy. No.
Yeah, because a lot of people say you have to go to NA, you have to go to AA, and like they say that there's only one way to get sober. You know, one of the things I don't like about AA is that, like, that this is the way, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the way. So you go into NA, you know that, you know, it's a spiritual based program, right? And you know that one of the biggest stigmas of the 12-step programs is that it's religious.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Whether it's religious, spiritual, what do you think it is?
At the end of the day, I think, so I'm glad you said this. My big problem for so long was I would get tripped up on that. And I tell people there was a time where I wasn't a big God guy. And it's not that I didn't believe in God. I just didn't know what to believe in. And so I don't know if I watched too much Joe Rogan or whatever. I start questioning everything. But I didn't know what to believe in. And so, but the one word that I was missing this whole time was faith. Right? You either have faith or you don't. And so as soon as, bro, it was proven to me. I wasn't a big God guy until this one story happened. And when this story happened, that let me know without a shadow of a doubt there is absolutely something in this world greater than me looking out for me, and nobody can ever tell me otherwise. And so people use this, they try to get hung up on this shit. You'll hear people in AA tell you or whatever, like, I don't care if it's that chair. If that chair is your higher power, cool. Let it be that.
Yep.
And so people just need to get over this. Like, who cares where it comes from? If your God's Jesus, if your God's God, cool. If your God's Muslim or whatever it is, cool. Like, find that one thing. But you just have to understand you are not the center of this universe. There's stuff bigger out here than you. And so I think it's a dumb thing people get tripped up on, basically, because they just don't want to get sober.
I think the universal foundation of recovery is just realizing that when you take control, shit hits the fan.
Right.
You know, as addicts and alcoholics, we should not have control.
Right.
At least in my opinion, we should not have control because we just fuck shit up.
Right.
You know, for me, when I came out, it was, when I first came, AA was my higher power because it kept me sober.
Right.
You know, because when I came out, I had like a month and a half of sitting around. And I did like 100 meetings in like 30 days. You know, since then I go to like one meeting a month. You know, like I'm not as active in AA because I've kind of grown in a different direction.
Right.
Like I'm one of those people that believes that, you know, recovery is your recovery. It's whatever you have to do to maintain your sobriety and your happiness.
Right.
That's what you got to do. If it's, you know, if it's Scientology, if it's smart recovery, if it's just, you know, talking to your friend on the phone twice a day.
Go ahead.
Good. No, go ahead.
The one thing I do know is if whatever program you're working is constantly making you do things you don't want to do, it's probably good for you. Because I know, like, on the days where I didn't want to go to an AA meeting, those were the days I really needed to have my ass in an AA meeting. You know what I mean? On the days when somebody's telling me to do a nightly or we're doing inventory and I don't want to do it, it's probably because I needed to do it. Now, I have a review, you know, and I work in the recovery industry, and it's, I say a lot of things a lot of times that are very against what the recovery industry believes in, because I don't believe in this cookie cutter way. Because what I'll tell you is I did, and you know, I'm an addict. I throw all my eggs in the one basket, and so I find out about spiritual health, and I go all in on this 12 steps. What I know kept happening for me is I would get trapped in this recovery bubble, where everything I did, everybody I talked to, every event I went to was recovery, recovery, recovery. And I would do that for a while, but eventually I would grow bored or mad or whatever it was, and I'd go back out. And what nobody ever talked to me about, or I didn't know that I was supposed to put any thought to, was understanding that recovery is my foundation. It's not my life. Mm-hmm. And so if you think you're just going to maybe you can. I'm sure there's people that go out there and do that. But if that's going to be, I sat down in my first AA meeting and I looked around and I was like, this is it? Like, I have to do this shit forever? Now, I'm not saying the program's not hopeful. Very hopeful. My outlook on the program wasn't hopeful because I'm like, I got to be tethered to this forever.
Yeah.
I didn't understand, like, oh, this is always my foundation, but it's on me to go out and find something in this world that lights a fire up under my ass that actually makes me want to get up out of bed every morning, that makes me want to live a life, that makes me excited to be sober. Luckily, I found running, and that was that special thing to me that lit that fire up under for me that actually started getting me to have a life. And so I try to tell people, it's like, all right, you're in treatment. I'll be like, so what's your plan? And they're like, oh, I'm going to go back home. You know, I need to get back on my job. I need to start doing this. I'm like, oh, so you're going to go live the exact same life you were and think something's going to be different. And so it's like, I don't care, man. All I know is I had a whole lot of energy that I put into the hustle of getting high every day. And when I got sober, I still had all that energy. So where's it going to go? And so luckily I found running and then all these different other things that I was able to build on that foundation with to now have a life that I think is a big missing link in there, because people just want to go with this cookie cutter 12-step way. If you're early in recovery, you just got out of treatment, it should absolutely be your entire world. You should be going to a meeting every day. You should have a sponsor. You should get sponsees as soon as you can. Every single person in your home group better know your name. You should have a service commitment, all that stuff. But you will naturally know when it gets to the point where it's like, okay, now I'm out of sober living. I'm living on my own. Now I have a job. Now I'm a year and a half sober. Now I'm actually to the point now where my mental health can actually start thinking about talking to a female or a man and having a relationship. And it's like building on it and not letting it become your entire world.
I'm glad you brought that up because, the whole idea of I want my life back is bullshit. Mm-hmm. None of us want our life back. We want the life that we're meant to live, the life that we should be living. Right. A lot of times the people, I could tell you how many people that I went to rehab with that have relapsed. I think there's maybe like 2 or 3 out of probably like 100 that are still sober.
Do you know what the statistics are for somebody that goes and does 30 days of treatment and then goes on and lives their life? What do you think the success rate is?
I would say it's 90% relapse.
0.02 success rate.
So 99.8 or I can't even do the math. That's a lot, folks. That's a lot.
Bro,
that's insane.
The statistics are not in our favor. And so I ask people all the time, if I'm sitting in a room full of 100 people, like, look around right now, how many of y'all are going to make it? And they look around and their jaw drops, like, because not even one. And so it's like, or what is that, 2? What's 0.02? No, that's not even 1, right?
It's not even 1%.
I don't do math, people. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't either.
I just know that those are not good statistics. And so it's like, okay, now knowing that, what are you willing to put in your path? What are you willing to do once you get out of treatment to make sure that you are that 0.02? And so it's these people who are like, man, I'm not going to sober living. I'm not doing IOP. I'm not doing therapy. I'm not getting a sponsor. All right. Good luck. Good luck.
How many people did you make good connections in your treatment center? Like, do you still talk to anybody there? Are they still sober?
Oh, the people I went to sober?
Like, like people that you dealt with in rehab and in sober living, do you still talk to them?
Very, very, very few. Very few.
I mean, it's, there's certain phrases that people say in rehab, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me, that they say that you have a feeling they're going to relapse. I got this. I'll be good.
Yeah.
I'm all right. When I went to treatment, we had what was called a warrior's plan. It was, what are you going to do on an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute, daily basis to maintain your sobriety?
Yep.
And that's what I had when I came out. When you came out of rehab, did you have a plan like that? Like, this is like, it was as far as writing down, like, 8 o'clock. AA meeting, 9:30, eat breakfast, 10 o'clock, go to the gym. Like, it was hour by hour for me in a daily planner when I got back for the first 2 months to make sure I stayed sober and filled my time. Because I think one of the biggest hurdles that we run into when we're coming out of recovery is that we have all this time that was filled with that substance and everything related to it. Now we have all this time, like you said, energy. Right. We have all this time and energy because, of course, we're starting to heal. We're starting to get that feeling of feeling normal again and wanting to be active again. Like, it's crazy that you go through that. Like, I just think back and it's just like so many people said to me when I left, they're like, you got this. And I was like, fuck you, I do.
Right.
I was like, I have no clue what's going to happen to me when I get out. And I honestly think that that's the attitude you have to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that? People, you've seen people in rehab that you're like, that guy's going to relapse. Oh, yeah, that guy's going to relapse. That guy's going to relapse. I mean, what is your advice to someone who's, in treatment, getting ready to come out on their own, getting ready to teach themselves how to be sober, how to be clean, and how to live a good life? What's your advice to them?
Completely submit to the process. If you don't completely submit, it's not going to work. you have to understand. You have to put your ego down and understand that you're going to this place because you are agreeing that these people know more than you do about staying sober. These are all, obviously, if they're working in a treatment center, most, if not all, have long-term sobriety. So you have to be willing to listen to them. If you think you know better, you're in the wrong place.
And you've been sober for what, 7 years now?
7 years, yeah.
Congratulations, man. Do you know your sobriety date?
Yeah, April 18th, 2017.
Good for you, man. Good for you.
And I do, hold on, I do have, you wrote it down minute by minute, and so nobody ever told me to do that. But my process was, I asked myself 2 questions literally for every decision I made every day. And I did it so much it just became a working part of my brain. And so the one analogy I always use, and I'm a diehard Steelers fan. We're in the season right now, and so I'll when I speak, I'll ask people like, what's the goal of every NFL team every year?
Super Bowl.
Super Bowl, right? So you as a person need to identify what is your Super Bowl. What is the absolute most important thing to you in your entire life? And I'll ask this to people in treatment, right? And just about every person in that room is probably going to say to get sober. But how many of that is that actually true? Is that really your goal? Or is it to get your wife back? To try to salvage your job? To try to get out of trouble? Like, only you can answer that question, right? So I had hit a point in my life and in my treatment and everything to where now the absolute 2 most important things in my entire world was to get and stay sober and to stay out of prison. There was nothing more important. So literally every single decision I made had to align with those 2 things. And so it ended up doing a lot of good for me because one of the things that I always neglected, my MO always was to hang around the funny guys. I'm going to hang around the funny guys. We're going to talk shit. We're going to pass time. It didn't matter if it was sports, school, the military, work, prison, anywhere. I'm hanging around the funny guys that talk shit. And so I started realizing, one of the most important things for me was the importance of the people I choose to allow to be around me, because at the end of the day, it's a choice. Nobody has to be your friend. And so I'm surrounding myself around with all these smart asses and all that stuff, and we laugh all the time, but ain't none of us staying sober. And so I have to start asking myself, like, this dude's funny as hell, but is he going to help me stay out of prison? Is he going to help me stay sober? No. All right, I can't be around him anymore. Well, then I start hanging around completely different people because now I'm identifying, like, that dude's handling his business. I need to surround myself around him. There were days when I would wake up and I didn't want to go run that day. And everything in my brain and my body is telling me to hit that snooze button. But I would have to ask myself, is me hitting the snooze button like I have my entire life, is that going to help me stay sober? Is that going to help me stay out of prison? No. So I had to go do it. So that went for, am I going to drink water today? Am I going to eat healthy food or am I going to eat shitty food? Am I going to go do this race? Like, it had to align with those 2 things, and I just kept doing it to where I just was only making good decisions.
Well, they say it's you're only as good as your next best decision, right? So talk about the running. What is that like to train that kind of running? Like, first off, what is an ultra marathon? How many miles is it?
So technically anything over 26.2 miles is an ultra marathon, but in the ultra running world, if you're talking to ultra runners, 100K, 100 milers, those are like now you're in like ultra territory. Technically a 50K would be an ultra, but ultra runners, you know what I mean? That's not like it's just a couple miles over a marathon, so they go hard. Dude, running was absolutely the best medicine a doctor never prescribed to me. It did more for my mental health than any pill or any therapy ever did. It was what I needed. And so I got involved in running. I found out about a little running group that met a couple miles from the treatment center I went to. I ended up getting special permission to go. And so I start going, and I go to these runs, and I barely make it through my first one, but when I got done, I just felt this sense of accomplishment. And it had been so long since I felt that. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to keep going back. And pretty quick, 2 miles turned into 3 miles, 3 miles turned into 4 miles. Right around 4 miles, I realized, I'm like, these cigarettes suck. They're making this running harder, but I love running, so I'm going to put those down. Then I started paying attention more about the food I was putting in my body and how I was fueling myself. And then luckily I fell in with one in particular person, my friend Penny, and she took me into the trail running world, and she's the one who saw something in me I didn't. And so she was who was training me up for races, and so she trained me up for a 10K. And I did a 10K, and I got done, and I remember I was feeling myself. I was like, ooh, look at me. I just did a 10K. And she looked at me, and she was like, you could do more. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, you could run farther. And so then my next race was a 30K, and she did it to me again. And then my next race was a 50K, and then she did it to me again. And then within a year being sober, I did a 100K, and it was in Bandera, Texas, 62 miles and rough terrain. And then I ended up qualifying for the Boston Marathon of 100 milers. It's called Western States. And so I can remember getting done with that race, and I'm inside a year sober, and I just looked around and I was like, wait a minute, like, I'm capable of far more than I've ever given myself credit for. Because for so many years now, I've been in meetings and stuff. Hi, I'm Shawn, I'm an addict. Hi, I'm Shawn, I'm an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Shawn, I'm a dope fiend. Well, I had said that shit so many times to where now that I thought that was my identity. But I'm like, wait a minute, dope fiends don't go out and run 62 miles in the heat of Bandera, Texas in the middle of the summer. Like, holy shit. And so that's kind of what started changing my whole mindset as far as like how I looked at myself, my confidence, all these different things. And just running was just, it put me in touch with the greatest group of people I had ever met. It lit a fire up under my ass. It put structure back into my life. It was everything I needed right when I needed it. And so I will go, I go tell the story about how Penny came into my life for running. And I would always give Penny all the credit. And it's taken me a couple years to kind of sit back and realize and get back. I've gotten back into church recently, definitely plugged back in with God, and it realized that, oh, wait a minute, like, that was God that put her into my life. And so the running thing, dude, was just the best therapy I could ever ask for.
I'm glad you brought something up. AA. Mark, I'm an alcoholic. That's probably my biggest hang-up of any 12-step program is the fact that you have to pronounce that you're an addict or an alcoholic every time you speak. Right. That's something.
It better be the right one, because if you're in a closed AA meeting and you say you're an addict, they're about ready to kick you out.
Yeah, I think in Pittsburgh, pretty much everybody's a little bit of both.
Everybody is. There's a couple meetings in Austin where they still keep it like it's a closed meeting. They don't want you saying addict, but they try to preserve it for like the old school alcoholics. But I mean, I could probably count on one hand how many people I know that are just like the pure alcoholic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You guys exist somehow still.
Yeah, we still exist. We're a rare breed, that's for sure.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, well, I am 50, so what the fuck. So what was your path back to God like? Because I just recently, probably about 3 months ago, went to my first church service in about 20 years.
Dude, it was a couple months ago, man. I think it was right around Easter, actually. That's what it was. It was Easter, and I have so many blessings in my life today. My life now at 7 years sober is so starkly different from when I was in addiction. Somehow a beautiful woman married me. I own a home. I have a dog. Like all these responsible things that never were a thing in my life, or I didn't think were ever a possibility. And I can just remember looking around and I was like, I'm fucking miserable right now. And I didn't know why. I couldn't point to any reason. And I work in the industry, I've been to meetings for years and stuff like that, and it wasn't what was pulling me back. But all I know is every single conversation I was having, every time I watched TV, every podcast I listened to, every podcast I did, every conversation I had, God would inevitably come up. And it was never me that was bringing it up. And it was literally like God was standing there, like tapping me on the forehead, like, hey, motherfucker, I'm trying to get your attention. Are you in there? And I was just like, wow, like... And I remember telling my wife, it's like, babe, like, I feel like I'm being, like, pulled back to church, to God. I'm not really sure what it is. And she was like, well, follow it. And so I had talked with a buddy, and I told him, I was like, dude, I think I'm interested in getting back into church. And he goes, that's perfect. He's like, I've been thinking the same thing. He just had a daughter. He's like, I want her to be raised in the church. So he's like, let's go. And so funny enough, at the end of my road, there was a church, and it's called Radical Church. And I would drive past that sign all the time, and I remember I would judge it every time. And I'm like, all I can picture, I was like, man, there's probably people in there with snakes, and they're chanting and speaking in tongues and all that stuff. And so my buddy says, all right, we're gonna go to church. I know this place. We'll go. Well, he takes me to Radical Church. Turns out it's the most laid back, chill vibe people. Like, it is amazing. And so I go in there, just felt at home immediately, and it was one of those scenarios where the pastor's giving his sermon, and it felt like every word is just hitting me dead in the chest, like he's talking to me. And so I remember having the thought during the thing, it was like, all right, man, this is just like a meeting. Am I just going to go be in a meeting, or am I going to partake in the meeting? You know what I mean? Because you could say you go to meetings, but if you just sit in the back and you don't ever get to know people, have a service commitment, you're not in the meetings. You know what I mean? And that's why people are like, oh, AA didn't work or whatever. Like, did you work that shit? Did you really go in there and do that, or did you just say I went to a couple meetings that didn't work? And so I went up, introduced myself to the pastor and everything, and invited him out to grab lunch sometime or coffee. And so we ended up, it was the week of Easter. It was the Monday the Monday before Easter that coming weekend, and we sat down and we had lunch, and we talked for maybe 5 minutes. He didn't know there was a movie about me. He didn't know I was a public speaker. He didn't know any of that. And we're sitting there talking, and he goes, Shawn, he goes, he goes, every sermon I've delivered for the past couple months is leading us to Easter. And he goes, for whatever reason, I woke up this morning and God let me know that I wasn't supposed to be the one to deliver the sermon on Easter. And he goes, now I know why. He goes, would you be willing to come speak on Easter service like that? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And he's like, well, we do 4 services. You don't have to come to them all if you don't want to. I was like, dude, I'll be there for every one of them. And so he went up, and I go home, I tell my wife, I'm like, the pastor wants me to speak on Easter. And she goes, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, no. Like, Easter's like the Super Bowl for the church. Like, the fact that this dude just met me one time and he wants me to come speak is crazy like that. And so I went up and I spoke, and I've just been there ever since. So, again, something greater than me looking out for myself that was pulling me in that direction.
I mean, the public speaking thing is one of the really you've done a lot of really great shit.
Thank you.
But for me, the public speaking thing is like huge, because that's something I want to work towards, With AA, it's been difficult because, I wanted to start talking. Mm-hmm. I wanted to start doing lead meetings like the first week I was there.
Yeah.
Like, you have to wait a year. I was like, I'm not waiting a fucking year. So I started doing
a podcast. A year?
Yeah, they wanted me to wait a year. The home group that I was in were like, yeah, it's usually not till a year until you do that. And I was like, but I have shit to say, and I have a recovery program to work, right? Like, and that's part of my recovery is talking. Like, I learned very early that I have to talk or I'm going to lose my shit. So, like, how did you get involved in the public speaking aspect? Outside of
I'm
meetings.
still hung up that they wanted you to wait a year.
Yeah, they literally were like, it's a year before you do a lead meeting. And then, like, the big thing was, like, when you hit a year, it's like, oh, I can do a lead now. Yeah.
I mean, if anything, I'd want the newcomer up there learning the stuff, reading how it works.
Fresh, with all the fucking fresh damage, you know what I mean? Like, talking about their shit.
I mean, let them pick a topic. Give them, I don't know.
Oh, now that we're on that, like, seriously, like, that's the problem. That's one of the big problems.
Love you, AA. I'm not talking shit, I swear. I just don't understand sometimes.
That's one of the big problems I have with AA is the structure aspect of it. It's not structure for efficiency. It's old school structure. Like, when you do, like, your 4 steps, they're like, you have to do it a certain way. I didn't do it that way. Like, I did the steps, with the exception of 3, in like 2 months. Like, I was done with them. 3 was the hardest one. I skipped right over 3 and worked on the other steps because I was like, I'm not going to just sit here and wait. Like, I got to figure out what the hell I believe in.
Yeah.
And I'm still working on that. I'm slowly getting back to God. I know it's not me anymore. I am not the center of the universe. But just the AA for me is a great program. It's 100% the way to go if you're right out of fucking rehab and you need some structure in your life. But there comes a point where there's a V in the road, and you got to pick what you're going to do. You're either going to stick on the path of a devout AA follower, and I use the word follower because sometimes it seems like you're kind of in a religion, or do you branch out and find your own way? And I got some kickback for branching out and doing my own way. Everybody's like, well, this is how it works. This is the way the system works. You have to do it this way. And I'm like, no, I don't have to do it that way because this is my recovery. It's my life. Right. I actually had a lady one time because I would sit there. We were doing something. We were talking and we were sharing. I think it was on step 1 and 2. And I was like, the thing that keeps me sober is knowing that if I drink again, I'm going to kill myself. And she's like, well, you can't think that far in the future. I'm like, well, why not? I mean, I'm fresh out of rehab. That's what keeps me sober is remembering where I was. Like, how is that bad? Yeah. And she's like, well, it's a day-by-day process. I'm like, no shit, it's a day-by-day process. But I had to have a bigger picture, and that's where me and AA have kind of gone different ways. Like, I still believe in the program 100%. I just don't agree with sometimes the way it's carried out. You know what I mean? The stigmas that are involved in it and the rigorous dedication to the fact that this is the 12 steps. So it's a suggested program of recovery. Yeah. It's not the only way. Right. So, I do this and I do my other things. It works for me. But, it just...
Dude, I would have people... So, oddly enough, I had people where I was doing the ultra running thing, right? And I had people in the 12-step community come up and say, well, you know what you're doing. You're replacing one addiction for another. And I was like, okay, I hear what you're saying. You could say that. But if you're going to tell me this thing that I've discovered that has literally lit a fire up under my ass, that has put structure back into my life, that makes me excited to be alive, actually makes me excited to be sober now, that has put me around the greatest group of people I've ever met in my entire life. That makes me eat healthy. It makes me get up early. It makes me go to bed early. If you're going to try to tell me that this is a bad thing, then I don't know if we can continue to have this conversation. Because I think, man, like if it's in the book, listen to it.
Yeah.
If it's somebody's opinion, you got to consider the source of where it's coming from. You know what I mean? Because if you're going to sit there with a rock star in this hand and a monster in this hand and a cigarette hanging out of your mouth and a vape in another, and you got to fucking dip in and you're going to sit here trying to tell me how I need to be healthy or I need to do this and that, or you know the way, like, but I've seen people at 10 years sober when they speak at a meeting, when they talk, I like sit back and was like, is that what I have to look for look forward to right there? Like, that dude sounds fucking miserable.
Yeah.
I want to grab him and be like, hey, dude, you want to come for a run for me later? Like, tell me how you feel after that, because I bet you don't sound like this. And so it's like, man, I've loosened up. If it's helping you and it's helping you stay sober, bro, there's so many things now, you know, with law enforcement, with the military, with veterans and stuff like that, how they're fun. And if you're somebody that cannabis is helping you, cool, do that shit. If you're somebody where you're going under a doctor's care and you're getting ketamine or you're getting MDMA or whatever, and that's helping you with your PTSD, awesome. I don't care. If it's helping you improve your life and stay sober, I'm not here to tell anybody. You know, my course for recovery and my course to get sober was a little bit different than some other people's, and so I'm not anybody to tell anybody that what they're doing right and wrong and all that. If you're doing something that's improving your life, then by all means continue.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, with 12 steps, the whole idea is to talk about what worked, what didn't work, and tell our story to other people so that they can learn from that story, whether they like it or they don't.
Yep.
It's not to direct people in a certain direction. It's just to say, hey, this worked for me, this didn't work for me.
Yep.
I'm giving you this information because I think it may help you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, you know, AA is becoming more and more progressive in that it's like progressively going towards devout following of the 12 steps.
Right.
And I'm like you, I'm not bad mouthing AA because I wouldn't be here sober if it wasn't for AA in the first 6 months of recovery. They saved my life. You know, the people I met there are great, and the friendships that I made. I still have a few people that I like hang out with outside of there. But it's just tough to look back on it, and you know, the program is so good. It is so good.
Yeah.
But then you just see how it gets manipulated.
Yep.
Like everything else, you know, there's certain people that are in there just to hear themselves talk.
Yeah.
And there's certain people in there that want to learn and want to heal, and they're not getting that same
Right.
thing like you get it from running. You know, for me, I get it from golfing.
Yep.
You know, every time I go golfing, I may play like shit, but I look around, I'm like, this world is beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, like I get to see these trees and I get to play in the sand like a 12-year-old. You know, I get to do all these cool things. We're going to wrap this up pretty soon because I know you got some things you got to do today. But if you have any, I don't want to say advice because advice is talking like we know more than anybody else. But is there something that people could take away from your story, from your progression from, you know, military to addiction to military to being clean to ultra runner to podcaster to all the things you're doing? What would you tell people, or what would you say is something that they can take from this, from your life?
Surround yourself around the best people possible at all times. Going back to my football analogy and my Super Bowl analogy, I'll ask everybody, you know, what's your Super Bowl? And then again, the most important thing is who's in your locker room, who's your team around you, because we all know what happens when an Antonio Brown gets in the locker room. What happens? The team goes to shit. And so it's something that's non-negotiable in my life. Like, I hold myself to a standard now in my life, and anybody that I choose to call friend gets held to the same standard, and they know it. I have too much going on in my life right now, and I'm too thankful to let anybody else fuck it up for me. And so that's the biggest thing, is whether you're going to no meeting, you'll hear people all the time. Find the people in that room that have what you want in life and get around them. But all these people that want to be continue to, I want to get sober, but I still want to talk to my ex or my, you know, these old friends or anything like that. Like,
People, places, and things, my friend.
yeah, for sure. And so that's the biggest thing. And then, man, this sounds super corny to say, I feel like, but I know, like, if I can do it, anybody can. But I go back to the treatment center that I went to, and they know me as the 100-mile guy or the guy that ran the, you know, with the documentary and all that stuff, and I could never do that. It's like, that's what you don't understand. I was never a runner growing up. I played basketball, football, baseball.
I hate running.
If I was running without a ball in my hand, I was in trouble for something. That was punishment. I never imagined what running would do for me, or that would be as big a part of my life as it is or was. I didn't know that, but understand you're not the same person you were when you were getting high as when you are sober. You're in completely different things. You're around different people. You're trying new, different activities and all that stuff. So surrounding yourself around with those good people, finding something you're passionate about. What are you going to channel all that energy to now that you're sober? Those are the two biggest things for me, for sure.
Well, I'm going to tell you from man to man, like, you're an inspiration.
Thank
To me, you're an inspiration. When you reached out to me on Instagram, it was like something snapped. It was like, this dude's got his shit together. Like, I want to get to talk to this guy, and I want to find out more about him. Hopefully we stay in touch, and we get together and do some more stuff down the road. But folks, Shawn Livingston, an amazing human being. I Am Redemption podcast, also 100 Miles to Redemption, the documentary about Shawn Livingston. Check this guy out. He's got a lot of good things to say, a lot of good guests, and he is living the American dream. And by American dream, I mean happy and sober. So in the final words, as always, there's always a seat here for you at the Steel City Roundtable. Help is just a corner around a corner for you. You got to reach out and take that hand when it's offered. But you know how to get a hold of us, and we love you guys.